It was a regular morning at the school, and the classroom buzzed with the usual mix of chatter, laughter, and the scraping of chairs. Students were slowly settling down as the teacher walked in, carrying a stack of papers. Everyone knew it was going to be another normal math lesson, nothing out of the ordinary. But today, something unexpected was about to happen, something that would change the way a student was seen in that classroom forever. The teacher, a middle-aged woman with years of experience, had a reputation for being strict but fair. She often tried to keep her lessons lively, using jokes and small pranks to keep the students engaged. Most of the time it worked. Today, however, she had a different idea. She looked across the room at one of the students, a quiet and thoughtful boy who usually sat at the front. He wasn't the loudest or most attention-seeking student, but he always paid attention and completed his work carefully. She decided to challenge him with something far beyond what the class had learned. The student looked up as the teacher approached. He noticed her holding a sheet of paper and giving a small, almost mischievous smile. He didn't know what was coming, but there was a strange tension in the air that he couldn't quite place. The teacher handed him the paper and said, almost teasingly, that it was a problem meant for students 2 grades ahead. She chuckled softly, expecting him to be confused or perhaps even embarrassed. The rest of the class watched curiously, sensing that something unusual was happening. At first, the student stared at the paper in surprise. His mind raced as he read the complex numbers, unfamiliar formulas, and challenging equations. He could feel the eyes of his classmates on him, some of them snickering quietly, assuming he would struggle. He took a deep breath and reminded himself to stay calm. He had always enjoyed math even when it was difficult, and he knew that worrying wouldn't help him solve the problem. He began by reading the first line carefully, making sure he understood what the question was asking. His hand moved smoothly over his notebook as he started to write down his thoughts. Step by step, he began breaking the problem into smaller, more manageable parts. The teacher leaned back in her chair, folding her arms and waiting for the inevitable moment when he would admit defeat. She was confident in her prank. After all, the problem was designed to be almost impossible for someone at his level. But the student didn't panic. He had a natural curiosity that made him enjoy challenges, even when they seemed too difficult at first. He thought about what he knew and applied it carefully, one calculation at a time. Slowly, the numbers started to make sense. He remembered similar problems he had seen before, the formulas he had learned, and the logic that connected them. His pen moved faster now, and a faint smile appeared on his face as he realized he was making progress. The classroom was unusually quiet. The other students were watching, some with raised eyebrows, others whispering to each other. They couldn't believe how focused he was. The teacher, meanwhile, tried to hide her surprise. She had expected him to struggle immediately, but now she had to admit, at least to herself, that he was doing something impressive. She didn't say anything yet, though. She wanted to see how far he could go. Minutes passed, and the student continued to work diligently. He didn't glance around the room or seem bothered by the whispers and laughter of his classmates. His mind was fully occupied with the problem in front of him. He tried different approaches, tested his calculations, and even corrected small mistakes as he went along. The process was slow and methodical, but he felt a growing sense of confidence with each step he completed. At one point, he paused to think. He looked at the problem from another angle, considering a solution he hadn't thought of at first. His eyes lit up as he realized a simpler way to approach it. He quickly began to rewrite his notes, adjusting his calculations and checking them carefully. The teacher noticed the change in his demeanor. He was no longer just trying to solve the problem. He was enjoying it. She had expected embarrassment, but instead she saw determination and intelligence in action. The students around him began to whisper more seriously now. Some were impressed, others shocked. They had never seen him tackle anything so challenging before, and they were beginning to understand that he was more capable than they had realized. A few students exchanged glances as if silently agreeing that they had underestimated him. The energy in the room shifted. What had started as a joke was slowly turning into something else entirely. The student continued, unaware of the growing attention. He focused on each line of the problem, checking his work and thinking carefully about each step. He was in his own world, completely absorbed in solving the puzzle before him. The teacher watched closely, her earlier amusement giving way to a quiet respect. She realized that her prank might backfire, not in a humiliating way for the student, but in a way that would challenge her own assumptions. Finally, after what felt like a long time, but was only a few minutes, the student wrote down his final answer. He checked it once more, ensuring that each step made sense and that his reasoning was clear. He took a deep breath and looked up, ready to share his solution with the class. The atmosphere was tense. Everyone was curious to see what would happen next. Would the answer be correct? Would the teacher be surprised? The classroom held its collective breath. The teacher asked him to explain his solution. He stood up and began to speak clearly and confidently, walking the class through each step of his thought process. His voice was calm, and his explanations were logical and precise. The students listened intently, amazed at how effortlessly he navigated a problem meant for much older students. The teacher, trying to maintain her composure, nodded along, realizing that she had underestimated him entirely. By the time he finished, the classroom was silent for a moment, processing what they had just witnessed. Then slowly, applause and murmurs of approval spread across the room. The student smiled modestly, feeling a quiet sense of pride. He had taken a situation meant to embarrass him and turned it into a demonstration of skill and patience. The prank had not gone as the teacher had planned, but it had revealed something far more important: his talent and determination. The teacher, still recovering from the surprise, decided to acknowledge his effort publicly. She praised his methodical approach, his persistence, and his clear explanation. She reminded the class that assumptions about anyone's abilities could be misleading and that everyone deserved to be challenged fairly. The student sat down, feeling both proud and relieved. He had faced the unexpected, met it head-on, and come out stronger. After the lesson, as the students packed up their bags, many of them came over to congratulate him. Some admitted that they had doubted him, and others were curious about how he thought through such a difficult problem. He answered politely, sharing a little about his approach but not boasting. He knew that the most important thing wasn't the recognition, but the personal satisfaction of overcoming a challenge that others thought was beyond his reach. In the days that followed, the story of that morning spread through the school. Teachers and students alike began to see him differently. The experience became a turning point, not just for him, but for the classroom as a whole. It served as a reminder that talent and intelligence often lie beneath the surface, and that underestimating someone based on assumptions can be a costly mistake. That day remained in everyone's memory, not because of a prank, but because of how it unfolded. A simple classroom exercise had transformed into a lesson about respect, perseverance, and the power of believing in oneself. The quiet student, who had been underestimated, had shown that he was capable of extraordinary things, and in doing so, he changed the way his classmates, and even his teacher, thought about potential and ability. It was a morning that started like any other, but ended with a moment that would be remembered for a long time. The student had just solved the challenging math problem in front of the entire class, and the atmosphere in the room was electric. Some students were whispering to each other, trying to understand how someone so quiet and reserved could solve something so complicated so quickly. Others were staring in awe, realizing that the assumptions they had made about him were completely wrong. The teacher, who had intended this as a lighthearted prank, was now trying to process the unexpected turn of events. As the student calmly explained each step of his solution, his classmates leaned forward in their seats, paying close attention. His voice was steady, and he spoke with a clarity that made even the most complex parts seem simple. It wasn't just that he had found the answer, it was the way he approached the problem, breaking it down into smaller steps and explaining his thought process as if he had done this hundreds of times before. The class began to see a different side of him, one they hadn't noticed before. Some students were quick to admit to themselves that they had underestimated him. They had judged him based on appearances, the way he kept to himself, and the fact that he didn't often speak up in class. But now it was impossible to ignore his intelligence and focus. Even the teacher realized that the prank had unintentionally revealed a talent she had overlooked. She had expected confusion, but what she got instead was a lesson in humility. The student continued, moving through the final parts of the problem. He double-checked each calculation, making sure there were no mistakes, and then confidently wrote down the final answer on the board. The room went quiet, everyone waiting for the teacher to react. She looked at the board, then at the student, and finally broke into a small smile. She nodded slowly, impressed despite herself. This was not the reaction she had anticipated when she first handed him the paper. After a brief pause, the teacher asked the student to explain his reasoning to the entire class again, step by step. He patiently went through each part, pointing out the logic behind his calculations. His classmates listened intently, some jotting down notes to understand how he had reached the solution. There was a sense of collective learning, as if everyone in the room had been given a glimpse of a new way to think and approach problems. As he spoke, a few students began to ask questions, trying to understand certain parts of the process better. He welcomed each question and answered with patience, never showing any sign of frustration. It was clear that he enjoyed sharing his knowledge, and this made the classroom feel more like a collaborative space than ever before. The teacher watched closely, noting how his ability to explain the problem clearly had captured everyone's attention. It was a powerful moment, one that went far beyond a simple classroom prank. The class period continued, but the energy had shifted. Students who were once distracted and uninterested were now focused and engaged. They were inspired to try harder and approach problems differently. Even those who had laughed at the initial challenge were now considering their own potential. The students' success had created a ripple effect, encouraging others to believe that they too could tackle challenges they might have thought were impossible. During the break, several students approached him quietly, wanting to ask how he had solved the problem. He smiled modestly and explained that he had simply taken it step by step, breaking down the problem into smaller parts that he could manage. He talked about the importance of patience, careful thinking, and not letting fear of failure get in the way. His words were simple, but they carried weight, and his classmates listened closely, realizing that they had much to learn from him. Even the teacher took a moment to reflect. She realized that her prank, intended as a joke, had instead provided a valuable learning experience for everyone. She understood that her assumptions had been influenced by biases she hadn't fully recognized. This moment was teaching her as much as it was teaching the students. A reminder that talent can be hidden and that everyone deserves the chance to prove themselves. As the day went on, the student's achievement became the topic of conversation throughout the school. Teachers in other classrooms heard about what had happened and congratulated him when they saw him in the hallways. Fellow students approached him with respect and curiosity, asking questions about his approach and methods. Even students from other grades were impressed, and some admitted that they wished they could have been in that classroom to witness it firsthand. Back in the classroom, the teacher decided to turn the moment into a lesson for the entire class. She asked everyone to reflect on how assumptions and biases can affect the way they view others. She encouraged the students to pay attention to the strengths and abilities of everyone around them, rather than making quick judgments. The discussion was thoughtful, and many students shared their own experiences of underestimating someone, realizing that this could happen more often than they had thought. The student listened quietly during the discussion, content to let others speak. He didn't boast or seek attention. Instead, he remained focused on learning and improving himself. His humility made an impression on the class, showing that true talent doesn't need to be loud or boastful to be powerful. It was clear that his success was not just about solving a difficult problem, but about the mindset he carried and the way he approached challenges with care and determination. As the school day ended, students left the classroom talking excitedly about the event. Some were still processing what they had witnessed, while others were inspired to try harder in their own work. The student packed his bag quietly, a small smile on his face, satisfied with what he had accomplished. He knew that the most important part of the experience was not the praise or recognition, but the personal growth and the example he had set for others. In the following days, the story of the classroom challenge continued to spread. Teachers began to reconsider how they approached their students, thinking more carefully about how they could nurture talent rather than make assumptions. The students' peers started to pay closer attention in class, trying to engage more deeply with their own learning. The classroom environment began to change, becoming more supportive, more curious, and more respectful. The student himself continued to excel quietly, focusing on his studies and enjoying the satisfaction of learning. He had discovered that facing challenges head-on, even when they seemed impossible, was incredibly rewarding. He also realized that staying calm, thinking carefully, and explaining his reasoning clearly could have a powerful impact on those around him. The experience had taught him lessons about perseverance, confidence, and the importance of believing in oneself. By the end of the week, it was clear that the classroom had been transformed. Students were more attentive, more willing to help each other, and more open to new challenges. The teacher had gained a renewed respect for the potential of each student and was committed to giving everyone the chance to shine. The student who had once been underestimated had become a quiet leader in the room, showing through actions rather than words that anyone could achieve great things with the right mindset. What started as a simple prank had become a moment of learning and growth for everyone involved. It was a reminder that intelligence and talent can appear in unexpected places, and that assumptions should never replace genuine observation and understanding. The student had faced the challenge with calm determination, turning a potential embarrassment into a powerful lesson for his classmates, the teacher, and himself. The memory of that day would stay with the classroom for a long time, a story of resilience, skill, and the unexpected ways people can inspire each other. After the initial surprise of solving the difficult problem, the student's accomplishment began to spark a quiet but steady change in the classroom. The energy that morning had shifted from casual chatter and mild amusement to a genuine sense of curiosity and respect. Students who had previously ignored their lessons were now leaning in, trying to understand the steps he had taken. Even the ones who were usually confident in their own abilities started to realize that there was much to learn from watching someone tackle a challenge so calmly and carefully. The teacher, still processing what had happened, decided to build on the moment. She asked the class to consider what had just occurred. She encouraged them to reflect on how easy it is to underestimate someone, and how assumptions could lead to missed opportunities. She spoke with a tone of sincerity that was different from her usual lighthearted approach, and the class responded. There was a seriousness in the room that hadn't been there at the start of the lesson. The student who had solved the problem sat quietly, absorbing the discussion without interrupting. He didn't need praise to know he had done well, and his calm demeanor added to the respect he had earned. As the lesson continued, the teacher introduced a few more challenging problems, not as pranks but as genuine exercises. The students approached them with renewed focus. Some tried solving them as quickly as possible, hoping to match what they had just witnessed. Others worked slowly, paying attention to each step, imitating the methodical approach they had seen. The student himself quietly worked on the new problems, treating them with the same careful attention he always did. His concentration was unbroken, and he occasionally offered small hints to classmates who were struggling, never in a way that seemed boastful but rather supportive. A few students, who had once been skeptical of his abilities, began to ask questions about his methods. He answered patiently, explaining his reasoning and walking them through each step. He showed them how to break a large problem into smaller, manageable parts, how to check their work at each stage, and how to stay calm when something seemed difficult. The students listened, fascinated, realizing that the skill wasn't just about knowing the answer but about thinking in a clear and organized way. His guidance was subtle but powerful, helping others improve without feeling like they were being lectured. The teacher noticed how the dynamics of the classroom were shifting. Students were more willing to collaborate, sharing ideas and helping each other rather than competing for attention. The quiet respect that the student had earned created an atmosphere where learning became the main focus, not who was smartest or fastest. The class, once filled with whispers and distractions, had transformed into a space where curiosity and effort were valued. It was a lesson in teamwork and mutual respect, sparked by a single moment of unexpected success. Outside the classroom, the story of what had happened began to spread. Students shared the experience with friends in other grades, describing how someone they had overlooked had solved a problem meant for much older students. Teachers in different subjects began to mention it, using it as an example of how talent can appear in unexpected places. Even parents, when they heard about it, were impressed by the student's determination and the way he had handled the situation. It was no longer just a classroom story. It was becoming a small but meaningful example of what can happen when assumptions are challenged. As days passed, the student continued to work quietly, consistently showing his skill and focus. He didn't seek attention, but his peers naturally began to look to him for guidance. When new or difficult problems appeared in class, students would approach him, not to show off or compete, but to understand his approach. He helped them, patiently explaining ideas and encouraging them to think critically. The teacher noticed that the entire classroom had begun to thrive in a way that hadn't been there before, all because one student had turned a challenge into an opportunity to grow. The shift wasn't only in academics. Social dynamics began to change as well. Students who had previously ignored or dismissed each other were now more willing to communicate and collaborate. Respect grew naturally, and teasing or dismissive behavior decreased. The experience had taught the class an important lesson about judging others too quickly and the value of patience, observation, and encouragement. The student had become a quiet role model, not through words or authority, but through action and consistency. The teacher, reflecting on the events, realized that she had learned something important too. She had planned a prank, thinking it would be harmless fun, but it had unintentionally revealed her own biases. She had underestimated the student's abilities because of assumptions she hadn't consciously recognized. The experience became a lesson for her, showing that every student deserves an opportunity to demonstrate their potential, and that educators must remain open-minded and supportive. She also realized that moments like these, though unplanned, can teach far more than a carefully structured lesson ever could. Over the next few weeks, the student's reputation as a capable, thoughtful problem solver grew. He continued to excel quietly, but his peers noticed the impact of his work and his approach. Class discussions became richer, and students were more willing to engage with challenging material. Teachers observed that the classroom environment had improved significantly, with less distraction and more focused collaboration. The small shift initiated by the student solving that one difficult problem had grown into a larger change that affected everyone. The student himself remained grounded. He didn't let the attention distract him from learning. Each day he focused on understanding the material deeply and helping others when appropriate. His humility made an impression, and it was clear that his actions were driven by genuine curiosity and care for learning, rather than a desire for recognition. Students admired him not only for his ability to solve problems, but also for the way he carried himself, with patience, calmness, and quiet confidence. As the school year continued, teachers incorporated more opportunities for all students to tackle challenging problems. They encouraged collaboration and reflection. Inspired by the example set by the student, the class became a place where effort was recognized as much as talent, where thinking carefully was valued, and where every student had a chance to shine. The student, while never seeking praise, continued to serve as an example of how dedication and clear thinking can inspire others. The experience also fostered important conversations among the students. They began to discuss how assumptions about people's abilities could be harmful and limiting. They reflected on times they had underestimated others or been underestimated themselves. These discussions, guided by the teacher, created an atmosphere of empathy, awareness, and mutual respect. The student's quiet influence had sparked not only academic growth, but also personal growth among his classmates. At home, the student reflected on the experience as well. He realized that the key to his success had not been innate genius alone, but the way he approached problems with calmness, careful thought, and persistence. He felt proud, not just of solving the problem, but of the positive change it had inspired in his classroom and beyond. He understood that true accomplishment comes from effort, patience, and a willingness to rise to challenges, no matter how difficult they may seem. The student's example began to influence other students in different classes too. Teachers noted that students who had witnessed the event were more willing to take on challenging tasks themselves. They approached problems with less fear of failure, knowing that careful thought and persistence could lead to success. The ripple effect of that one classroom moment was spreading, creating a culture of curiosity, effort, and respect that extended beyond the original room. In every lesson that followed, the student remained a quiet but steady presence. He focused on learning, helped others when appropriate, and never sought the spotlight. Yet his actions spoke louder than words. He had demonstrated that intelligence is not just about knowing the right answers, but about how one thinks, how one approaches challenges, and how one influences others through example. His presence in the classroom became a reminder that every person has unique potential that deserves recognition and encouragement. By the end of the term, it was clear that the classroom had been transformed. The students' peers had learned valuable lessons about persistence, humility, and respect. The teacher had gained insight into her own assumptions and the power of providing meaningful challenges. The student himself continued to grow academically and personally, quietly setting an example that would last long after the initial incident. What had started as a simple prank had evolved into a profound lesson for everyone involved, showing how resilience, careful thinking, and humility can leave a lasting impact. Even months later, the memory of that day remained strong in the classroom. Students continued to reference the lesson, not as a single moment of triumph, but as a turning point that reminded them to approach challenges with curiosity and courage. The student, still focused on his learning, had become a symbol of quiet strength and determination. His example taught a simple but powerful truth. Sometimes the most unexpected moments reveal the greatest lessons, and every person deserves a chance to show what they are capable of achieving. As the weeks passed, the impact of that one unexpected moment continued to resonate in the classroom. The student who had been challenged with the advanced math problem had quietly become a source of inspiration for many of his peers. The teacher noticed subtle changes in the way students approached their work. They were more willing to take on difficult problems, less afraid of making mistakes, and more eager to help one another. The classroom environment had become more collaborative, more curious, and more focused, and it was all sparked by the calm confidence and skill of one quiet student. The student continued to excel in his studies, not for recognition or praise, but because he genuinely enjoyed learning. He approached each lesson with patience and careful thought, taking the time to understand each concept thoroughly. His peers began to notice this approach and, in their own ways, started to emulate it. They asked more thoughtful questions, tried different methods, and were more persistent in solving problems they had once thought were too difficult. The student's influence was quiet but undeniable, and the teacher recognized that she had witnessed a rare and valuable transformation in the classroom. The teacher also reflected on her own actions. The prank she had intended as a joke had taken an unexpected turn, and she had been forced to confront her own assumptions and biases. She realized that her initial doubts about the student's ability had been shaped by appearances and past behavior, rather than any true understanding of his potential. This realization encouraged her to approach all of her students with more openness and patience, giving each one the opportunity to shine in their own way. She saw firsthand how one moment of underestimation could be turned into a powerful lesson about respect and fairness. Outside of the classroom, the story of the student's success spread slowly but steadily. Students from other classes spoke of it with admiration. Teachers in different subjects mentioned it during staff meetings, and even parents in the community heard about it. The student himself remained humble, never boasting or seeking attention, but his quiet achievements inspired those around him to take their own challenges seriously. The ripple effect of that one advanced math problem was growing, shaping attitudes and expectations beyond the walls of a single classroom. Within the class, the social dynamics continued to shift. Students who had once been competitive or dismissive toward one another began to collaborate more effectively. They shared strategies, discussed solutions, and encouraged one another to think critically. The respect for the student who had solved the advanced problem had created an environment where effort and curiosity were valued above ego or speed. The teacher observed with satisfaction that the classroom had become a place where learning was the central focus, and where each student felt capable of contributing meaningfully. The student, for his part, remained focused on his own growth. He tackled each new challenge with the same calm determination that had allowed him to solve the advanced problem. He continued to help classmates when they asked questions, not to show off, but because he genuinely wanted to make the classroom a better place for everyone. His patience and clarity in explaining concepts made him approachable, and his peers began to see that intelligence and humility could coexist. This quiet leadership helped others develop confidence in their own abilities. The teacher noticed that even students who had been indifferent or disengaged were becoming more involved. They asked questions, attempted problems they had previously avoided, and paid more attention to the explanations being offered. The atmosphere in the classroom had changed dramatically. The laughter and whispers that once distracted the class had been replaced by focused conversation and thoughtful discussion. It was a transformation that had taken weeks to fully develop, and it had been sparked by a single, unexpected display of skill and determination. One afternoon, during a particularly challenging lesson, the teacher decided to give the class a set of problems slightly above their current level. She watched closely as the students approached the work. Many of them remembered the confidence and methodical approach of their classmate and tried to emulate his techniques. The student tackled the problems with the same calm focus as always, double-checking his work and considering different approaches. When his classmates got stuck, he offered subtle guidance, asking leading questions that helped them think through the problems without giving them the answers outright. It was a masterclass in quiet mentorship, and the teacher was deeply impressed. The effects of this experience went beyond academics. Students were learning important life lessons about resilience, patience, and respect. They were realizing that judging someone too quickly could lead to missed opportunities for collaboration and understanding. They were also learning the value of persistence, careful thinking, and the willingness to face challenges even when they seemed intimidating. The student who had been underestimated had become a symbol of these qualities, showing that true strength often comes from inner confidence, humility, and dedication. As the school year progressed, the student's reputation as a capable, thoughtful problem solver continued to grow, but he never sought attention for it. He remained focused on learning, helping others, and approaching each challenge with care. His influence was felt not through words or status, but through the consistent example he set. Teachers noticed that students were more engaged, more willing to take risks, and more confident in their abilities. The classroom had become a community of learners, and the quiet student had played a central role in that transformation. The teacher also took the opportunity to reinforce these lessons formally. She incorporated discussions about the value of patience, effort, and respect into her lessons. She highlighted examples from the student's approach to problem solving, not as a way to single him out, but to show that thoughtful, careful work can lead to success. Students were encouraged to reflect on their own methods, consider how they approach challenges, and recognize the potential in themselves and their classmates. It was a continuation of the lessons that had begun with the advanced problem, but now they were being embedded into the culture of the classroom. Students continued to support one another, inspired by the example they had witnessed. They shared tips, explained concepts to one another, and worked together to solve difficult problems. The classroom had evolved into a space where curiosity and effort were celebrated, where collaboration replaced competition, and where every student felt capable of contributing meaningfully. The quiet student's influence had created a lasting change, one that would shape the learning environment for months to come. Even outside of school, the student's approach to challenges was noticed. Friends and family saw the way he approached problems thoughtfully and patiently. He applied the same calm determination to his work at home and in extracurricular activities, demonstrating that the lessons from the classroom extended beyond academics. The ripple effect of his attitude was subtle but powerful, inspiring those around him to take challenges seriously, remain patient, and approach difficulties with confidence and care. By the end of the term, the teacher and students had come to understand the lasting impact of that one advanced math problem. It had been a moment of unexpected triumph, but its effects went far beyond a single correct answer. It had shifted classroom dynamics, inspired personal growth, and created an environment where curiosity, persistence, and respect were valued above all else. The quiet student had taught lessons that no textbook could provide, showing that intelligence, humility, and thoughtful effort can change not only a classroom, but the way people see one another. The experience remained in the memories of both students and teachers, a story that continued to be referenced whenever new challenges arose. It was not just a story about solving a difficult math problem, but about resilience, patience, and the power of underappreciated potential. The quiet student, who had been underestimated at the start, had become an enduring symbol of what can be achieved through careful thought, persistence, and humility. His example continued to inspire others, demonstrating that the most meaningful lessons often come from unexpected moments and that every individual has the capacity to make a difference. As the school year drew to a close, the story of the advanced math problem had become more than just a single moment in a classroom. It had become a lesson that rippled through the students, the teacher, and even the broader school community. The quiet student who had once been underestimated had demonstrated that determination, focus, and careful thought could create a lasting impact. His success had not only shown his own abilities, but had also encouraged others to believe in their own potential. The student continued to approach every lesson with the same calm confidence. Whether the problem was simple or challenging, he tackled it with patience, breaking it down step by step. His peers had learned to watch him as an example of how to approach difficult tasks without fear or frustration. They had seen firsthand that careful thinking and persistence could overcome challenges that seemed impossible at first glance. The classroom had transformed into a place where students encouraged one another, celebrated effort, and learned from each other's approaches. The teacher, reflecting on the entire experience, realized that she had learned as much from the student as the student had learned from her. She had begun the situation with a prank, expecting embarrassment, but instead witnessed resilience, intelligence, and humility. She had recognized her own assumptions and biases and understood the importance of giving every student the opportunity to show their true capabilities. This lesson stayed with her, influencing the way she approached teaching and interacting with all of her students. The influence of the student extended beyond the classroom. Other teachers noticed how the dynamic in the class had improved and were inspired to create more collaborative and supportive learning environments. Students from different classes spoke about what had happened, sharing the story of the student who solved the advanced problem with determination and focus. Even parents, when they learned about it, expressed admiration for his calm approach and patience. The story had become a small but powerful example of how intelligence, humility, and persistence could inspire others. The student himself remained grounded and focused on his own growth. He did not seek praise or recognition. Instead, he quietly approached each new challenge with the same methodical thinking that had helped him succeed in the first place. His peers began to see that success was not about speed, showmanship, or being the loudest in the room. It was about clarity, patience, and thoughtful effort. By observing him, they learned that true accomplishment often comes from steady and deliberate work rather than instant results. During the final weeks of the school year, the teacher incorporated more lessons that encouraged problem-solving, collaboration, and critical thinking. She used examples from the student's approach, not to single him out, but to highlight the value of a patient and organized method of thinking. Students were encouraged to reflect on their own strategies, to consider different ways of approaching problems, and to respect the abilities of their classmates. The classroom continued to grow into a space where learning was central and where each student had the opportunity to shine. The students' quiet leadership had a lasting effect on the social and academic atmosphere. Peers were more willing to support one another, share ideas, and discuss challenges openly. Competition had shifted from one of comparison to one of mutual improvement. Students realized that learning was not just about getting the right answer, but also about understanding the process and helping others along the way. The classroom had evolved into a community of learners, and the student had played a crucial role in that transformation. Even outside of formal lessons, the student's influence continued. Friends and classmates sought his advice on problems or challenges, whether academic or personal. He offered guidance patiently, encouraging them to think for themselves rather than providing quick solutions. This approach built confidence in those around him and showed them that true understanding comes from thoughtful effort and reflection. His example demonstrated that intelligence combined with humility could create positive change not only in academics, but in personal growth as well. The teacher often reflected on how a simple prank had become a catalyst for meaningful growth. She realized that moments of underestimation could be turned into lessons about potential, resilience, and respect. The student had shown that the ability to succeed does not depend on loudness, confidence, or being noticed. It depends on focus, patience, and dedication. By responding to a challenge calmly and methodically, he had influenced the entire classroom and created an environment where learning and collaboration flourished. As the final days of the term approached, students began to internalize the lessons of the experience. They approached new challenges with more confidence, less fear of failure, and a willingness to learn from one another. They remembered the quiet student who had solved the advanced problem and realized that the most meaningful lessons often came from unexpected moments and actions. The classroom had become a place where curiosity, effort, and respect were valued above all else. On the last day of school, the teacher took a moment to acknowledge the growth of the class. She spoke about how challenges could reveal hidden talents and how assumptions could sometimes limit understanding. She reminded the students to pay attention to the abilities and efforts of those around them, and to approach every task with patience and determination. Without directly singling out the student, she highlighted the qualities that had inspired the classroom transformation: calmness, careful thinking, persistence, and humility. The student, as always, listened quietly. He did not seek recognition but felt a sense of satisfaction in knowing that the classroom had become a better place for everyone. His actions had sparked positive change, not through words or showmanship, but through consistent effort, patience, and support for his peers. The lesson was clear. True influence often comes quietly, through example and the steady demonstration of one's values and abilities. In the months and years that followed, the story of that advanced math problem remained a memorable lesson for the class. Students often recalled the moment as a turning point, a time when they witnessed the power of calm focus, careful thinking, and humility. The students' example continued to inspire others to take challenges seriously, approach problems thoughtfully, and support one another in their learning journeys. It became a story not only of academic success but also of personal growth and community building. The quiet student had taught everyone an invaluable lesson: that intelligence and potential are not always obvious at first glance, and that the way someone approaches a challenge can be more important than the immediate outcome. By remaining focused, patient, and humble, he had changed the way his peers viewed learning, collaboration, and respect. The classroom environment had been transformed, and the lessons learned there would continue to influence students long after the term had ended. Even as new students entered the classroom the following year, the story of the advanced math problem continued to be shared. It served as an example of what can happen when assumptions are set aside and when students are given the opportunity to demonstrate their abilities. The quiet student's legacy was not in any single answer or achievement, but in the lasting impact he had on the culture of learning, respect, and collaboration within the school. Ultimately, the experience demonstrated that challenges, even those presented as pranks or tests, could become moments of growth and inspiration. The student had turned a potential embarrassment into a powerful example of resilience, intelligence, and humility. His actions had not only shown his own capabilities but had also encouraged others to believe in themselves, approach problems with determination, and value thoughtful effort over speed or recognition. The story remained a testament to the transformative power of patience, focus, and quiet leadership, leaving a lasting impression on everyone who witnessed it.